Are you thinking of leaving Toronto and moving to Calgary? If so, you're going to want to stick around because in this video, I'm going to go over the key points and differences and what to look out for, and we're going to get into it right now. My name is Ryan Gillard, a Real Broker, your Calgary Realtor, and the past few years I've been getting a ton of people relocating from Toronto to Calgary. So I thought I would make this video for anyone else out there that's thinking of making the move. And if you are thinking of making a move either say next week or next year, I'd love to help you out still. Feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email. I'd love to help you out. So let's get right into it. So let's start off with the most obvious difference between the two cities, and that will be the cost of real estate to buy or rent. Now, I wouldn't classify Calgary as a cheap city. I'd say we're probably somewhere in the middle of the pack in terms of how expensive Canada is. Like, we're more expensive than Winnipeg or Edmonton or the Maritimes, but nowhere near as expensive as places around Toronto or the Vancouver area. So we're about in the middle of the pack. Toronto, on the other hand, is one of the most expensive places to live in Canada. Maybe not quite as expensive as Vancouver, but not far behind. And in fact, Toronto is one of the most expensive places to live in the entire world. And I've got just a quick little snapshot here of the prices. I got my notes here. So in Toronto, and I'm using the Toronto Real Estate Board's stats here, the average selling price across all home types is about 1.1 million. So that's an average of like single family homes, condos, townhouses. A detached home in Toronto costs about 1.6 million, so quite expensive. A townhouse is 1.1 million, and a condo, it's probably like a 500 square foot condo, is going for about $700,000. Now, if we look at Calgary, the average price across all home types is about $570,000. A detached home in Calgary, the average is just shy of $700,000. A townhouse is about $425,000, and a condo is $321,000, and that's based off the Calgary Real Estate Board's stats. So as you can see, in Calgary, it's a lot cheaper. You're not spending $1 million for a starter home. And I've actually heard of stories of people cashing out in Toronto and buying 2 to 3 homes in Calgary. So it's just a different ballgame out here. It's not nearly as expensive as in Toronto. And you can see why people are moving out of the GTA. It's just become too expensive. And, you know, people have that kind of American dream mentality. They want to have like a single family home with a family and a dog and a fenced yard. That's becoming a bit too out of reach for a lot of people in Southern Ontario. And they're looking at ways to live basically. And I think Calgary and other places in Canada like the Maritimes are becoming a legitimate option. And that's why you're seeing a lot of people move out of the GTA into these areas. And one last thing to mention about the difference between buying real estate in Alberta compared to Ontario is that we don't have a land transfer tax out here. And it can be quite substantial. So if you just Google Ontario land transfer tax calculator, you'll get lots of websites like this. And I'll just type in here, say $2 million is probably a very typical price of a single family home in the Toronto area. And you can see here the land transfer tax amount is $72,000, a huge amount. Now, I don't know what the government is doing to justify this kind of money, but it seems like robbery to me. So in Alberta, the average cost of legal fees is about $1,500 out here. So $1,500 versus $72,000. It's a huge difference. Like, you could save your entire life to get the down payment to buy a home that costs $2 million. And then you also have this whopping land transfer tax on top of that. So it seems unfair to me, and I don't know how they justify it. So in Alberta, when you're buying a property, you hire a lawyer. And the lawyer's job is to help transfer legal ownership, which they'll do by organizing it with land titles. And they'll also, organize the transfer of money from your lender to the seller. And on average, it costs about $1,500. So it's completely different out here, and it's a lot cheaper. And the last point here on living costs, I'll just briefly touch on rent in the Calgary area. Now, I don't do rentals. I just help people buy and sell real estate out here. But if you are thinking of renting, the best website is www.rentfaster.ca. And I'd say that you could find a 1-bedroom, like a apartment condo style property, and you might get that for like $1,500. Maybe a 2-bedroom is like $2,000 and up in the Calgary area. And I've heard that Toronto is maybe starting at $3,000 and up. So it is slightly more affordable out here for renting as well. Next up, I'll just briefly touch on the cost of living in Calgary. Now, I won't spend too much time on this because you are moving from Canada to somewhere else in Canada. The differences aren't that great. If you are curious about the cost of living here, I have a more specific video on this topic where I go into more detail, and you can find that video by clicking this link right here. Some of the highlights here is that Alberta, we just have GST, no provincial sales tax. So if you're watching this from somewhere else outside of Canada and you're curious what that is, GST is a government sales tax. So if you bought something for $1, 5 cents would go to the federal government. In Ontario, they have a provincial sales tax combined with the GST, and they call it HST, and that is 13%. And they share that between the provincial government and the federal government. So things are slightly cheaper in Alberta from that perspective. I would say gas is always cheaper in Alberta compared to anywhere else in the country. I filled up yesterday, I think it was $1.20 per liter. And the last point here is that personal income taxes. Now, I wouldn't be moving across the country simply because the tax rates are slightly different. I actually think it's cheaper in Ontario if you're under $50,000. I think it's a 5% flat tax, whereas Alberta, it's a flat 10% up to $142,000. And then when you're over that amount, I think Alberta is slightly cheaper than Ontario. But again, it's marginal. I wouldn't be moving across the country simply because you're saving 1% on your income tax. And the next point here, let's talk about transportation. Now, if you're watching this from Toronto, you know how bad your traffic is. It's legendary in how bad the traffic is in Toronto. I was there, I think it was last year. We were downtown Toronto and we're trying to go back to Mississauga. We missed our turnoff. And then the Maple Leafs game ended, and my goodness, it took us like 2 hours to get back to Mississauga. It was brutal. In Calgary, I find that most commute times are like 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops. So it's quite a different story to get around Calgary. It is much easier. Now, if you talk to anyone from their city, they will always claim that their city has the worst traffic. If someone from Calgary is saying that, that just shows you that they haven't traveled all that much, because the traffic out here is a piece of cake compared to most cities in Canada. I would say it's better than Toronto by a long shot, better than Vancouver, better than Winnipeg. I imagine Edmonton's probably similar to Calgary, but it's easy to get around Calgary. It is a piece of cake. And you could be downtown Calgary and be in a quiet community like 15 minutes later. So it's much easier to get around this city, even though it is spread out quite a distance, Calgary. It's just very easy to get around the city. And especially like if you were to go from the extreme northwest end of Calgary to the extreme southeast end, like it might take you an hour. It's a huge distance, but most people aren't making that commute. Like they're living in their area and they might go to downtown, which might take them like 20 minutes or so. Like I live in the inner city and it takes me 20 minutes, 30 minutes tops to get anywhere in the city, it seems like. So it's not quite as big of a hassle as in Toronto. Now, in terms of like the transit, like the LRT, we call it the C train here. The C train does cover a pretty good chunk of the city, and we're always expanding it. We're adding the Green Line, which should cover from deep southeast Calgary to downtown and right up the north part of the city. So I don't find our transit to be all that bad. I would just say it's okay. It's definitely not like going to Japan or something like that. And comparing it to Toronto, I don't find Toronto transit to be all that great either. I would just say both are okay. And the last section here, let's talk about things that people from Toronto might not know about Calgary. And these are just my kind of thoughts and observations. And the first point here is that Calgary is also very culturally diverse. I just assume that people from Toronto just think that we're all a bunch of rednecks. That's not the case. Calgary is very diverse. I would say at the present time, it's probably 60% white, and then the rest is a mixture of everything else. And in 20 years from now, that number might be like 40% white, then the rest is a complete mixture. So it's also very diverse, just like Toronto. Not as big as Toronto, but equally as diverse, I would say. And the next point, I would say that you'll find people in Alberta are friendlier than they are in the Toronto area. Now, I don't want to be offensive or anything like that, but Canadians are all fairly friendly, but everyone knows that who's from Canada, the friendliest people are found in the Maritimes. And then after the Maritimers, I would say the Prairie people are next up in terms of how friendly they are. So people from Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So when you come here from Toronto, you'll be kind of shocked at how friendly everybody is. And if you're coming here and you're worried that you won't fit in because you're not from Alberta, don't worry, because everybody in Alberta, not everyone, but most people here are from somewhere else. It's actually quite rare to find someone like myself that was born and raised in Alberta. It seems like everyone's from a different part of Canada or the world. And you will notice it when the Toronto Maple Leafs come and play hockey against the Calgary Flames. The entire Saddledome is blue jerseys. These are all transplants from Ontario. And so there's a ton of people from the Toronto area here. And so you won't be alone. So the next point, let's talk about outdoor activities. So Calgary was built with like urban development and nature in mind, where I find that Toronto is more like a concrete jungle. Calgary's built differently. There's all sorts of rivers and streams, and there must be 1,000 dog parks within the city limits. And some of these parks are massive, like Nose Hill Park or Fish Creek Park. Like you could fit like a GTA city in one of these parks. Like it's massive. And these parks are found all over the city. So it's a very green city. There's parks literally everywhere. And the people are very outdoorsy here. Where I live, I can be in the mountains on a 5-star ski resort in like an hour and a half. We have some of the best hiking in the world in the Canmore Banff area. So it's a very popular activity. So there's cycling, hiking, golfing. You'll just find people out here are maybe more outdoorsy compared to people in Toronto. Now, obviously, I'm born and raised in Alberta, but I've been to Toronto maybe 4 or 5 times. So I'm by no means an expert, but what I've seen is they don't seem to take advantage of their lake all that much. It's like there's always like a highway or like a train line running where there should be like a park or whatever. So if you're living in Toronto, you might find a big difference in how scenic and how much nature there is in the Calgary area, which I think is a good thing. And the next point here is that Calgary is voted as the cleanest city in the world. Now, I don't know how they rank this or how they find out who the winner is, but Calgary is a very clean city. Not that Toronto isn't, but you might notice a difference in how clean Calgary is. And the next point here, let's talk about the economy. Now, obviously, Canada is like a G7 country. Ottawa is the capital, but essentially Toronto is like the economic capital of Canada. Huge market, very diverse. It's just a bigger player than Calgary is, without question. But by no means is Calgary a slouch. Like we have the second most head offices behind Toronto in the country. So there's a lot of oil and gas jobs in Calgary, lots of financial jobs, tech sector, agricultural, transportation type jobs. So we have a strong economy here as well. And you might argue that Alberta is one of the major economic drivers of the country as well. And a lot of those jobs are centered in Calgary and Edmonton. So we are a big player as well, but not nearly at the same size and scale as Toronto. But we still do quite well, I would say. And next up, let's talk about the weather, everyone's favorite topic in Alberta. So I'd give the edge here to Toronto. If you're moving out here from the GTA to Alberta, it's probably a downgrade in terms of weather. And so I've heard from people that are from Toronto that their climate is kind of like you have 4 seasons that are all 3 months, and it's a very stable and predictable climate. In Calgary, not so much the case. You can't really see it behind me, but I was away in the Philippines for 2 weeks in January, and it was so cold here. It was about minus 45 for like a 10-day stretch. And it was so cold my pipes burst and my floor is all damaged right now. So it gets brutally cold in Alberta, but it's a bit of a shit show in that it can change rapidly. So this photo that you see in the background is from yesterday. I went for a walk and it was pushing like plus 15 degrees. So 1 week it's minus 40, the next week is plus 15. So it's just kind of just a random climate. It's always changing all the time. And I'd say the only common or the only stable trait to our climate here is it's always sunny. That's like the main thing here in the West, is that it's typically a sunny climate in Calgary, but the weather, it just changes rapidly all the time. Other things that you might notice about Calgary is that it's very dry. Whereas Toronto is hot and humid. I was there a couple of years ago in August, and I swear it was maybe 38 degrees Celsius and 100% humidity. Not the case here. Like the hottest days of the year in Calgary are maybe like 30 degrees. There's the odd freak kind of weather pattern where it gets like 35. That's extremely rare. A hot day here is plus 30 with very little humidity. So it's actually quite easy to dress for. It will get cold at night, even in the summertime. So a hottest day plus 30, but at nighttime it gets down to maybe 10 degrees. So air conditioning, is becoming more common, but it's not necessary out here just because it gets so cold at night. But it's still good to have, but it's not like a must like it is out east due to their humidity. So we do go from extreme to extreme with our climate, but I'll say if it is like a seasonal day, say it's January or February and it's minus 5, minus 10, because it's so dry here and sunny, that's very easy to dress for compared to like say minus 5, minus 10 when it's humid. That kind of cold bites you right to the bone when it's like sopping wet. It just kind of sticks to you versus the dry cold, very easy to dress for. So it can get brutally cold here, but there is some relief. We have the Chinooks that come quite often, so it can be hot, cold, not a huge snowfall again, and so the Chinook will melt it might snow again, and back and forth. So it's not too uncommon to have like brown winters here, which might surprise some people. And next up, let's talk about politics. Now this might be a big point for some people. Now I'm just generalizing here. I don't want to piss anyone off or get too far down the rabbit hole, but Toronto is definitely more of a liberal hub, and Alberta tends to be more of a conservative province. So you got Team Red and Team Blue. So you will notice different mindset out here from Toronto. That might be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. I know a ton of people from Ontario that have moved out here and they're just like tired of the mindsets in the Toronto area and they're quite happy here. That said, you will find that Calgary is a very moderate city. Maybe the stereotype out east is that we're all a bunch of rednecks out here, but I think you'll find that Calgary is maybe an exception in Alberta. It's more of a moderate place. I mean, it's a big city. There's like 1.5 million people here. I bet you in 10 years we'll be pushing 2 million. So we're attracting people from all over the world and Canada. So you can't just label the entire city as all conservative. You get everything out here. It's a very moderate place. And I think anyone can fit into Calgary. It's not too hard to fit in here. But you will notice some differences in mindset out here. Like, it's not uncommon to be talking to an Albertan and they'll just go off on Ottawa and maybe Eastern Canada. You'll see like an F Trudeau bumper sticker or an F Trudeau flag on someone's home. You will see I love oil and gas flags and bumper stickers. You'll see end equalization payments is another contentious topic out here. So you will see stuff like that, which maybe you won't see out east. And I'll leave it at that. I think it's, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but there might be some slight differences in mindset out here versus in Toronto. But again, it is Canada. It's not like you're leaving to a different country, but there are some slight differences as well that you might like or you might dislike. So I'll leave it at that. And we're almost done here, but just a few more points. Let's talk about urbanism. Obviously, Toronto is a huge metropolis, massive city. That kind of urbanism doesn't exist to the same extent in Calgary. Obviously, there are a few pockets that you might consider if you're moving here and you want to be around that kind of urban environment, like the Beltline, Kensington, maybe Mission. Might fit that kind of idea, but again, not to the same extent as Toronto. If you are curious about some of the neighborhoods and you have some questions, I'm easy to get a hold of, feel free to reach out. I'd say Calgary is more of a single family detached market versus like the condos and the urban madness of Toronto, but it is changing gradually over time. Calgary is becoming more urban, but not nearly to the same scale as Toronto still. Again, more of a single family detached home market at the moment. Now, of the two, I would say Calgary is definitely more scenic than Toronto and Southern Ontario altogether. I drove from Ottawa to Ottawa to Toronto maybe 2 years ago. It was mostly just flat and green. It was scenic, but if you come to Calgary, you'll notice just how hilly it is, especially on the west side of the city. You got rolling hills into the foothills and the mountains. It's definitely a very scenic place if you move out here from out east. And like I could be driving around, just stop my car and take a photo sometimes. There are just pockets of it that are incredibly scenic. And the last point here, I found this on Reddit looking for ideas for this video. And one guy that moved out here from Toronto to Calgary, he said that in Toronto, you'll find 4 friends that live kind of close together and they'll go to some trendy restaurant. In Calgary, you'll see 4 friends that are kind of scattered throughout the city and they'll come for like a backyard party at someone's house. So maybe it's just a bit more of a suburban environment versus an urban environment. Well, I hope you found value in this video, and if you'd like to continue to receive content like this, feel free to like and subscribe. My goal is to make about 2 to 3 videos about living in Calgary per week this year, and feel free to give me a call, shoot me a text, send me an email. I'd love to help you out. If you're moving next week or next year, please reach out. Again, I'd love to help you. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.